Hi everyone, welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain, and this week we are talking about a term that shows up in the Mishnah on Bava Batra, Daf Pei Dalet Amud Bet 84b, and that term is pikeach. Now, often the term pikeach in both Tannaitic literature and in the Gemara shows up as somebody who is just of sound mind, completely coherent mentally, which is as opposed to, for example, someone who is a shota or a shotet, right? Someone who is having mental incoherence. However, in this Mishnah, it's showing up a little bit differently. It's actually showing up as somebody who is clever and is clever enough to do something that's completely legal that will be to their own advantage and perhaps to the disadvantage of someone else, depending on how you look at it. So let's look at the example, because what I want to do is I want to talk about the pikeach or the pekachat as a category. I am, as some of you may know, very interested in the role that cleverness, subtlety, prudence plays in law and knowing when you are within your rights to do certain things that will help you avoid difficulty. But what are the parameters? When do you move from being just pikach or pikachat, being clever and knowing how to get the law to your advantage? When do you move from that to being a problematic figure, right? Or doing something that is problematic or over the line? So I'm interested in that writ large, and that's part of what makes me interested in the category of the pikach or the pikachat. And today I actually want to talk about two different categories, the pikeach or pikachat on the one hand, and the Rama'i or the Rama'i.t on the other. So let's take a look at the Mishnah in Bava Batra. It is on Daf Pei Dalet Amud Bet, and you can also find it in the Mishnayot, Parak Mishnah Zayin. So Amocher Perut Lechavero, we're talking about somebody who's selling produce. Mashach velo madad kana. If the person buying the produce, and of course the Gemara is going to talk about what kind of property are we talking about, because there are certain types of kinyanim, certain types of acquisitionary behaviors that work in certain properties, but not other properties. But we'll leave that for now. You learned that in the Gemara. But the point is, if the buyer has pulled the produce, but still has not measured them, they have already made their kinyan, meaning the mocher, the seller can't renege, right? The transaction, it's already in the hands. It's already considered the property of the buyer. But if madad velo mashach, if the buyer measured the stuff but didn't pull it, lo kana, they haven't acquired it. So this Mishnah, again, whose kalim are they using in order to measure? That's for the Gemara. But this Mishnah itself is talking about the question of when an acquisition is considered com- completed, maybe is the wrong word, but achieved, let's say, meaning that the mocher and the mocheret can't go back on it. But here's what's great within that context of realizing that there may be a stage in which the lokech or the lokachet has done something towards the acquisition, but has not achieved the acquisition yet completely, that the mocher or the mocheret could renege. You can imagine a scenario where the price of an item goes up in between the time that they measure the item and the time when the lokeach or lokachat actually pulls it, right? And within that time, it's possible for the broker to say, actually, I don't want to make this sale unless I can charge you more. So the Mishnah then suggests something that would help you get around that problem. So im haya pikeach, if the buyer was clever, socheret mikoman. What the buyer would do in order to make sure that the seller can't renege, the buyer would rent the property that's underneath the produce. Now, is the Mishnah saying this is what the buyer should do? Not clear, but if the buyer was clever, which here appears to be a positive, the buyer will, you know, rent the property. And of course, this is based on the Mishnah in Kiddushin, Parak Aleph, Mishnah Hey, that nechasim she'ein lahem achrayut niknim im nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayut, right? That portable items can actually be acquired by sitting on top of land that you buy with the way that you acquire land, whether with kesef, with money, with a shtar, with a document, or with a chazaka, with some sort of taking of possession, right? Whereas usually a portable item would have to be acquired through some other means. Sometimes you pull it, sometimes you raise it up, right? Here, if it's on top of another land, on top of a piece of land that you've bought with kesef, it's automatically acquired. So this is what the Mishnah is basing itself on. It's saying, if you're clever, you don't have to deal with all this question of, have you measured it? Have you pulled it? It's already the acquisition is achieved and the mocher cannot renege. So I love this category and I want to look at a few more examples of it in Mishnah and Tosefta, just to round it out a little bit. What I'll say is already what I see the pikeach or a pekach.ת being able to do is they know the law well enough to recognize that if they do things one way, they may be at a disadvantage, namely that the mocheret can change her mind. But if they do things another way, they will be at an advantage, and well, they are at an advantage because the mocheret can't renege. But there's also disadvantages of the acquisition already having happened. Like if something happens to the produce, it's on the lokeach or the lokachat to deal with it because now it belongs to them. So it's not a full advantage, but it being a pikeach indicates that you have knowledge of the halakha in such a way that you can make choices that will get you to the ends that you need. Okay, I want to give you another example, and I'm going to share my screen for it. And this other example is, and I'm just giving you from Sifur Tanait. I'm just giving you from Tanaitic literature right now, because it's a little bit more manageable, and also that's where it's introduced. So there's a Mishnah in Ketubot in the 13th parak there, mishnah, that essentially has two people coming for a litigation where hamotzi shtar chov al chavero, one of them essentially brings their shtar, their document, that they had lent money to the other party. And clearly the date has passed to be repaid, and they say, this other party hasn't paid me back. What does the other party come in with? Vahala, this other person comes in with, Otzi shemacharlo et hasadeh. The other person comes in and says, by the way, I've got my own document, and my document says that this person who claims I owe them money sold me a field. I got to be honest. Why would they sell me a field if I owe them money? Right? That's a weird thing to do. Imagine somebody's in debt to you. They haven't paid you yet. And what do? You go sell them a field. Well, they still owe you money. Do you even trust them that they're going to pay you? Like, doesn't make any sense. So what do? Admon says, Admon Omer, Yacholu Sheyomar, it's possible for the borrower to say, Ilu hayiti chayav lecha, haya lecha lehipara et shelcha kshemacharti li et hasadeh. If I really owed you money, you should have forced me to pay when I was buying the field from you, right? Meaning you had something I wanted. That would be the perfect opportunity for you to say, hey, give me the money you owe if you want to buy my field. But what do the Chachamim say? The Chachamim disagree and say, this is not necessarily a smoking gun that clearly the debt was repaid, because there is a reason that a person might choose to sell land to someone who owes them money without collecting the money. Take a look. The Chachamim Omrim, Ze haya pikeach. And he said, no. This person who sold the land, they were being clever. They understood how the law works. Shemacharlo et hakarka, by selling the land to the debtor. Why? Because now the person who's owed money who just sold the land can say, oh, I'm actually going to use this land as a mashkon. I'm going to use it as collateral for what you owe me, right? I now actually have some way of collecting money from you, right? You pay me for the land, and I keep the land as collateral if you don't pay me the debt. So this is a great example of a person who understands how the law works and realizes there may be a more clever way. If I can't get this person to pay me back, there may be a more clever way of me getting them to pay me back. If I have the land in my possession, I can hold it as collateral if it's land that they bought. And that means they're going to pay me for it. And then I'm going to take it as collateral for the loan, right? So this is somebody, again, who understands how the law works. And what I think is very fascinating is that in neither of these cases do you get a sense that the person who's the pikeach is being very explicit about what they're doing, right? I come over to you, our mishnah in Bava Batra, I come over to you, I want to buy payroll, and I say, you know what? Actually, I'd like to rent that whole space. You could think of it as, I don't want to have to move the payroll. I want to have it there. It's too much of a schlep, right? I don't say it's because I don't want you to renege, but I know that that's the reason that I'm doing it. Or the case where you owe me money and I still sell you a piece of land. I don't say to you, well, actually, I'm only selling you this land so that I can keep it as a mashkon for what you owe me. If I did that, you'd never buy it, right? You'd never enter into a contract with me. In fact, the Gemara says that Admon's position was essentially what I should have done as the seller is I should have gone in front of two witnesses and I should have said the only reason why I'm selling this person any land, not in front of the buyer, the only reason why I'm selling this person any land is because I plan to take it as a mashkon. And the Gemara says, come on, everybody knows somebody. Someone's going to hear it. Eventually, the debtor's going to hear it and not go through with the transaction. So in some ways, this is sort of about being implicit and not explicit and understanding the way that law works. I'll give you another example, which I think is very like the silence of it is actually the topic of what makes you a pikeach or a pikachat. So in the Tosefta in Menachot, there are a whole bunch of examples of what might happen if somebody is engaged in, a Kohen is engaged in doing the avoda and is specifically sacrificing or offering, because it's not always, we're actually talking about, well, let's go with offering. Let's stick with that, right? Wait till we get to Kachim to talk about sacrifice and offering and are there differences. But somebody is giving an offering and it's a public offering, right? Meaning it is considered an offering of the tzibur. And we know that in general, we say Tuma Hutra B'tzibur, that if there is an avoda of the tzibur, a korban tzibur, that's being given, and the Kohen becomes tameh, or even the item itself becomes tameh, you can still go through with it. So this section in the Tosefta in Menachot in Perek Gimel goes through a number of examples where a Kohen is in the midst of giving an offering that, and in the middle of that, it becomes tameh, whether they should speak up and say anything or not. So if you look at number 6 here, Haya makriv shtei halechem. Let's say it's Shavuos, and the Kohen is putting out the 2 wheat loaves of Shavuos, considered a tzibur, an avoda of the tzibur, v'nitzme'u biyado, and they became tameh in his hand. Omrin lo, they say to him, Heve pikeach, be smart, ushtok, and don't say anything. It's amazing, right? And then it gives example after example. But one of the most interesting ones that I want to look at is actually with the Korban Omer, right? Korban Omer being offered the second day of Pesach. It's cut Motzei, the first Yontif of Pesach, and it's given Mimacharat HaShabbat, meaning the day after the first Yom Tov of Pesach. And here's the story. Hayam Makrivet Omer, if somebody was giving the Korban Omer v'nitma and it became tamei, Omer, he should say something, umivin acheret tachteha, and they should bring another one instead. But what about ein sham elahu? What if they don't have another one? Omrimlo, they say to him, v'pikeach ushtok, be quiet. That's Divrei Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon. Meaning, Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon seems to think that perhaps you can get another Omer in its place. Rabbi says, no, no, no. Ben kach u'ben kach omrim lo hevei pikeach ushtok, right? No matter what, whether you have more sitting around or not, you tell them, be quiet. Don't tell everybody that it's tamei. Just give it. Sha'omer shekatzruhu shelo kemitzvato pasul. Because if they cut the Korban Omer not according to its mitzvah, okay, it is pasul. Now, not according to its mitzvah, it's not clear what that means, but the Yerushalmi actually says in the bold here, she'ein omer shenitzar shelo mitzvato kasher. A Korban Omer, meaning the barley that was cut, is not kosher for the Korban Omer unless it was cut specifically for the mitzvah, right? And moreover, Sabar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, meaning Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Actually, we're going to skip that because the Yerushalmi goes differently. Let's leave it at that. She'em omer shenitzar shelo mitzvato kasher, right? So you're not going to be able to get another one. And of course, it's very interesting. The Gemara in Yoma, Bava Batra, has a whole conversation to Daf Zayin about whether this example proves that Tuma is Hotra B'tzibur, that we are just essentially saying we just kind of ignore Tuma when we're talking about an avoda of the tzibur, or whether Tuma is Hodcha B'tzibur. Tuma is pushed off in the situation of an avodat tzibur, but if you could find one that's not tamei, you should use that, right? And so it actually looks at this example, this machloket between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and Rebbe about whether you should try to bring another one. They start talking about whether that proves the fact that you should try to bring another one, according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, indicates that it's only hodcha and it's not hotra, right? It's only pushed off, but if we can do better, we would like to do better, right? So here it's just so clear that what we're talking about is a person who knows the halacha, they know Tuma Hotra B'tzibur. And the truth is, they know if they say something about it now, it's going to cause a whole hullabaloo. People are going to get upset. They're going to want to try to find another one. It's like, no, just be quiet. Just know the halacha. And that knowledge should be something that leads to advantage in a positive way, right? So that's a perfect encapsulation, in my opinion, of what it means to be a pikeach or a pikachat. Implicit, based on deep knowledge, and not doing anything wrong, right? Like you're not like all of what you're doing is considered positive or neutral or fine, right? And we recognize that, and maybe even we laud it. Now, I want to contrast that with the figure of the Rama'i, the figure of the trickster, which also shows up in Mishnah. And I want to be very clear that I find, and it's not only this way, but it seems like the Rama'i, first of all, aside from being somebody who, lies and cheats and tricks, I think it's interesting to see that the Rama'i also often is specifically speaking and is lying, right? Like they're using their words not to like do something that's totally legitimate, but be implicit about what they're doing. they're using their words to explicitly lie, right, about the truth. And I think that's worth thinking about. I want to share my screen and show you a couple of examples, right? So we have some examples from Bava Batra, the mishnah of Bava Batra. Let's take a look. We're talking about somebody who is trying to claim an aveda, right? Trying to claim their lost item. So what do they have to do? They have to give simanim. They have to give distinguishing marks for this lost item, right? But guess what? Some clever people could fake it and give you the right distinguishing marks, but it doesn't belong to them. So this is the Mishnah about Matzia, Pek.ת, Mishnah Zayin. Amar et aveda v'lo amar simaneha, if somebody said, this is the lost item, but couldn't tell the distinguishing marks, lo yitin lo, of course, you're not going to give it to them. V'haramai, but somebody who is a trickster, afal pisha amar simaneha, even though they were able to say the distinguishing marks, lo yitin lo, shouldn't give it to them. Shenemar, as it says, ad drosh achicha oto, right? Pek.ת, we just read it in Kitetse. Ad drosh achicha oto, until your brother looks for it from you, is looking for it, right? That's the way the Torah says. I mean, figure you live in small societies back then, you're going to return the lost object when somebody comes looking for it. But the Mishnah reads it differently. Nope. Ad shetidrosh et achicha, until you examine your brother, meaning the person who's coming to claim it, im Ramai hu im eno Ramai, whether they are a Ramai or not, whether they are a trickster or not, right? So I think it's kind of interesting that we're looking out for a person who's just downright lying and making it seem like I'm the person who owns this object. I will say there's another category, and by the way, I mean, you look in the Mishnah and the Rama is all over Bava Batra in particular. If you look in the Mishnah, it seems like the Rama is like a real problem in society, and that we actually, public policy wise, some of us want to make decisions based on making sure that a Rama does not marviach, a Rama is not able to profit from their Ramaut, from their, being willing to be a trickster. But it's so clear, it's so obvious that the pikeach or the pekach.ת and the Rama'i or the Rama'i.ת are such different people, right? They're meaning their actions are so different. The funny thing is the Rama'i seems to know the Halakha too, right? She knows, oh, I come, I give the simanim, they're going to give it to me, right? So how do you find out if they're a Rama'i or not a Rama'i? It's so funny. The Tosefta and Bava Batra actually says they had to bring a raya. They would have to bring some sort of evidence, right? Maybe two edim that said, I'm not a Rama'i in order, right? So maybe it's like the town Rama'i or the town Rama'i.ת. But I think it's interesting to consider that like the Rama'i is pretty knowledgeable too, right? Like they know what they're doing as well. In fact, the ability to be tricky or the ability to be clever does rely on knowledge of the law. I want to bring in one more category, and that is one of my favorite categories, ha'arama, hey, ayin, resh, mem, hey. That ha'arama is brought up in the Mishnah in two positive ways and one negative way. And I'll put it in the notes so you'll be able to see it. It's brought up in either sort of neutral to positive ways that we do clever workarounds when it comes to the case of a Behor Behema Tahora, a firstborn of a kosher animal, or when it comes to Pidyon Maser Sheni, when it comes to evading attacks of when I'm redeeming my Maser Sheni. It comes up negatively where somebody is called a Rasha Arum, a cunning, bad person, I suppose, right? But the Mishnah doesn't say what that is. So I think it's interesting to note also that the term harama, or Rasha Arum, is sort of floating around in the Sifrut Tanaït as well. And the Rambam has an interesting comment, which, by the way, could only apply to Mishnah, if that, but it couldn't apply to the Gemara because it's just not true when we get to the Gemara or even to the Tosefta. But the Rambam in his Pirush HaMishnayot in Masechet Tmura, beginning of Perek Hey, he says, "V'tachbula muteret nikret ha'arama." A permitted subterfuge is called harama, which is true in the Mishnah, v'she'ena muteret mirma, and a not permitted trick is called mirma. So I think it's interesting to consider that we have a very literate um, rabbinic uh, inheritance, right? Like you have to understand the halakha, know the halakha. And I think there's a recognition of once you understand and know, there are ways to take advantage, right? So some of those ways to take advantage are considered you're a pikach or pikachat. Some of those ways to take advantage, you're doing harama. And some of those ways to take advantage, you've now become a Rama'i or a Rama'i.т, right? So the care has to be taken never to fall into that third category. And even once you get to the Gemara, there are going to be arguments over where harama is okay and where harama is not okay. And even, by the way, where being a pikech or a pikachat is something that is frowned upon in the way that you are reacting. But suffice it to say, it gives us a little bit of insight into the awareness that a little bit of knowledge can do a lot of damage. And it can also bring great advantage in good situations. Thanks for learning with me, everybody. Looking forward to next time.